There's some statistic that there's $4 trillion of fraud that happens every year. But one of the things we also do, the dark side of what we do, is we lie.
Do you think AI makes trust more fragile, more enforceable, or kind of somewhere in between on that spectrum?
I use AI.
Sol Nasisi is the founder of Booksie, one of the largest creative writing platforms online, and the co-founder of Chainletter Labs, a blockchain company on a mission to stop liars. He serves as executive director of digital marketing at Bentley University. He is presented at NFT NYC and has been featured in Cointelegraph.
Once you get to a certain point, you do have to bring other people in. There are specializations that happen. You have front-end, back-end people. You have DevOps. I'm kind of philosophically predisposed to is saying, I'm going to start a company, I have to raise capital. That's not my first step.
I think when you're seeking investment, if you can prove that there's a market fit and you already have customers, that's a big plus.
Yeah, I think
Welcome to the dark arts of software engineering team optimization. I'm Franz and I'm here with my co-host Kyle Johnson. Today's guest is Sol Nasisi, a founder who's built multiple companies with intentionally small engineering teams and has spent a lot of time thinking about trust, both inside organizations and in the products we build. Sol has worked on startups like Bentley, Bookie, and Chainletter, where he tackled a very timely problem: how to prove that something existed at a specific moment in time and hasn't been altered. An increasingly important question in a world shaped by AI-generated content. In this conversation, we're going to explore what it really takes to scale trust, integrate new developers without breaking momentum, and build products and teams when certainty is in short supply. Sol, welcome to the dark arts of software engineering team optimization. Great to have you here.
Yeah, Franz, Kyle, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I just jump right in. I mean, you've built multiple companies where the development team has stayed intentionally small, which is kind of, different in the industry. What led you to that model? Was it philosophy, necessity, learned behavior, or something else?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think one of the key reasons is I've always wanted my companies to be pretty agile and able to move quickly and able to pivot. And so the smaller the team you have, especially on the development side, the faster that you can do that. You don't have a large code base necessarily. I mean, some of the code bases are getting pretty big, but you don't have a lot of people that you have to bring along. You don't have a whole process that you have to work through anytime you want to develop a new feature. You don't have to change control and all the different things that go along with something that's scaled up and has more developers there. So that's part of it. I think a lot of my companies were constantly iterating, constantly testing, constantly trying new things. And so it lends itself to sort of a small team MVP type of approach. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons that we've tended to stay small.
Do you think that that's kind of like a certain point of development or growth where the team needs to grow?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, once you get to a certain point, you do have to bring other people in. There are specializations that happen. You have front end, back end people, you have DevOps, you have security. And it's hard for a small team to do all of that and have the expertise to do all of that. And so definitely, I mean, and it also depends on what type of application you have. If you're if you're a banking application, you probably need to do those types of things sooner rather than later. If, my applications, I've tried to be in spaces that aren't heavily regulated, that don't have, that aren't huge attack vectors, where we're not storing a lot of data. And so therefore, it's made it easier for us to be able to do that. But I think other startups or other companies that are in different spaces probably wouldn't have the luxury of being able to stay as small as we have. So that's definitely part of it. I think too, the other reason is, it's expensive to add developers. And so as a company, you have to think, do I have the resources and time to bring someone else on, to train them, to pay them? Software developers are pretty expensive. And so that's another consideration, I think, that smaller companies have to think about. I've never taken venture capital. And so I've always sort of bootstrapped my companies. And so that's been part of the consideration set also. There's definitely a cost dimension to it. I think the third piece of it is and I'm sure you guys have come across this, it's hard sometimes to mesh different developers. And when you get one person who's sort of architected your application, they have a very specific philosophy and a very specific way that they like to do it. And bringing other people on board and getting them to mesh with that philosophy can sometimes be difficult. And sometimes it's even counterproductive. So it's about finding the right people who actually can complement everything that's going on and fit sort of the philosophical approach that your main developer is taking. So I think all of those, when you think about all of those factors, I've tended to take in a very slow, cautious approach to adding development support and expanding my teams. Most of my teams have been two, three. Sometimes we've had four people working, but we've tended to not get larger than that. But we've been able to get pretty much everything done that we need. Like I said, that's with my application. It wouldn't necessarily work and translate to every type of company.
One core developer for a long time. And is there anything specific that kind of breaks down when you add a second or third to that one person that's really been running the show?
Yeah, I think it's once again, Chainletter was founded by one of the co-founders of the company, and he's brilliant, but he has his way of wanting to do things, and so it's about finding people who fit into that model and that mode of wanting to do it.
Yep.
And I wouldn't say it breaks down, but it slows him down a little bit because he has to take time to go ahead and train up new people that we bring on to explain the way that he's done things. And so Chainletter is a pretty new company. And so that's the balance that we've always tried to take is how much do we slow him down
Yep.
to bring other people on board versus having him continue to go and do it. And at some point that will become unsustainable. And we've actually brought on a few contractors and we have other people now who are getting familiar with the code.
Good.
So,
Good.
it's balancing those factors.
Yeah. So I suppose it's difficult sometimes to decide when is it actually time to bring on someone new versus, do we need to fix something with our process or because you only have one of him.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. So one of the things that we were thinking about, as we were thinking about scaling up our application is the DevOps side,
Yeah.
right? And, how much do we want to Dockerize what we're doing? How much do we want to use Kubernetes? Is it even necessary? I mean, our application, we don't have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on it right now. And so we have people who could come in and do it, but Nick kind of made the call that we're not at that point yet. We're not ready for that level of infrastructure because once you add that, it's not just the installation of it, it's the maintenance of
Yep.
it. And the maintenance cost is something that, you have to think about also. And so we decided to kind of forego that for the moment. In the future, if we continue to grow and the application gets bigger and we get more traffic and we need that type of infrastructure, we'll add it and we'll add the expertise. But, it's partly a timing thing. You don't want to overbuild before you have kind of the volume that it needs to support.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to your previous comment where you're bootstrapped. Is that just a philosophy that you guys have? Like, is there a reason that you haven't raised any money or?
I've started two different companies and bootstrap both of them. Chainletter's the third. I don't know what we'll do with Chainletter. I think it really depends on, do we get to a point where we need external capital in
Yeah.
order to continue the growth of the company? And if we do, then we'll think about, what other sources are. I don't know if we've gotten there quite yet with Chainletter. We're still kind of trying to figure out the right product market fit. And so, I kind of take it on a case by case basis. What I don't do, what I'm kind of philosophically predisposed to is saying, I'm going to start a company, I have to raise capital. Like that's
Yeah.
not my first step. And maybe that's a fault with me as an entrepreneur. I don't know. Maybe I'd be better if I did that, but I tend to like to go out and prove the business and grow the business. And then if I get to a point, like I said before, where I think capital would add something to what I'm trying to do, then I go ahead and go out and seek it.
Yeah.
So
No. And I think I think when you're seeking investment, if you can prove that there's a market fit and you already have customers, that's a big plus for any investors that are going to be thinking about,
Yeah, I think it helps strengthen your case for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think, could I use capital now for some of my businesses? Maybe it would help. I don't know. I have to
Yeah,
think about that. This podcast will make me
yeah,
reflect on it a little bit more.
good, good.
But I think it's very cool that you're, doing it yourself. I feel like a lot of times founders, their first instinct is like, let's just find capital. And the business then becomes constantly raising capital versus concentrating on the core business.
Yeah, and I've always been more comfortable kind of running the business than looking for capital. Like I said, that might be one of my flaws as an entrepreneur, but I've wanted to maintain control. Also, I know a lot of people who raised money and wound up losing their business,
Yep.
right? Because they didn't hit the numbers, it didn't hit the projections, and their funders came in and basically took the company from them. So I've wanted to avoid that. I have a longer term horizon, I think, than what most like venture capitalists or angel investors have. So
Yep.
and that works for me. I think you have to. I remember I was in business school once and we were doing this business case and we were talking about this company and the CEO wasn't in a big hurry and people were saying, "Well, what's the problem with the CEO? Like why isn't he pedal to the metal?" And it turns out he just wanted this as a family business. He didn't want
Mm.
to, grow it to be like the next huge Microsoft or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
Um, I'm not saying I'm necessarily like that, but I think you have to understand like an entrepreneur's vision of where they want to go and my timelines and the way that I want to do it and the control that I like to have is what precludes me from jumping into raising money right away. Not that I wouldn't ever rule it out, but it's not the first thing that comes to my mind. So,
Yeah, it makes sense. Franz, did you want to jump in with something?
The big question I had, kind of jumping back a little bit, when you were talking about starting to grow a team, I was like, what are you looking for beyond kind of the CV and hiring new people to engineering? Because it feels like, when teams are super small, interpersonal dynamics matter disproportionately. So, like, what behaviors or patterns or things are you looking for as you're kind of adding people to the team?
yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, dependability. I mean, I brought in people before and they just kind of disappear or they, say that they're coding, but they're not, you can tell they're not really doing a lot of work. They're not very efficient. They're not getting stuff done. So someone that I can depend on that if I give them a project, it's going to happen. I think the second thing is just feeling confident that they know what they're doing, that they really sort of understand the code base that I'm working with or the technology that I'm working with. And if there's a problem, they're able to find the problem and resolve it. I have one guy that I've worked with for 15 years, and he came on because I was having trouble with, my application and servers and load. We were just adding so much traffic that my server administrator at the time couldn't keep up and he didn't really know what to do. And this guy came in and like within a day, he had everything fixed. And
Nice. Oh, wow.
so,
Yeah.
it's things like that that make you realize that, okay, this person knows what they're doing. And that's someone that I want to continue to work with. And so if you take that and you add it to someone who's dependable and reliable, and also someone who just you gel with, who's a nice person, who you enjoy speaking with, who you can, you know, hang out with, or you don't even need to hang out with them. But as long as you can have like a civilized conversation, those are the things that I sort of look for.
Gotcha. And I feel like the conversation part is, you just have a conversation. But for the dependability piece, is there a way that you kind of vet for that up front? Or is that just
Yeah,
we got to work
that's a good
together and
question. I don't
figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, usually what I'll do is I'll give someone a project and, I like to start pretty small and see how they do. And depending on how that project goes, and I never hire someone like full time, like right away. I'll basically start on these small little projects. And it's kind of like a trust building exercise. And so over time, you start to figure out, do the two of you want to work together? Like, is this a partnership that seems like it has legs and could result in something more. And so as that trust is built, then that leads to kind of working together more, which continues to sort of snowball. And I've had situations too where I've hired people from overseas And so that's even more difficult because, you're dealing with a different culture. You don't know if they are just going to sort of take off or disappear. It's really hard to kind of track that. And so that process is even more important when you're dealing with overseas developers.
Yeah. That's where you just gotta work with somebody like Hellenic, just throw in a shameless plug. Go ahead, Franz.
Yeah, that's where that small project thing is really, really valuable. But even I've worked with, developers here in the United States too, and it's kind of the same process.
Yeah.
So,
Kind of ease into it, and you get a good sign, right? If they're willing to do that type of work, they're probably gonna stick it through and, be good on the other side. And if they fall out on a small project, probably not gonna be good on a big one.
yeah, I think the other piece of it too is, are they excited by what you're doing? Because developers have, a lot of options. And so are you going to spend the time to, ramp them up and get them familiar with what you're doing just for them to leave like 3 or 4 months later? That's a huge time sink. So, do they seem like they're aligned with your vision? Are they interested in what you're doing? So,
And you mentioned earlier kind of the philosophy of the first kind of programmer that writes most of the code, and then you bring people onto that. Do you often try to align philosophies when you're bringing new people on, or is it more like you're just trying to align work styles and psychology or, cultural stuff?
yeah, I don't even know if it's that. It's really about the way that they sort of think about developing, the way that they think about the code, the way that they document things or don't document things. That's what I found tends to be sort of the most important in terms of developers being able to relate to each other. Do they like to use the same technologies? That's where I've found it's kind of important to have some kind of alignment. And I've also found I'm not a developer. So, I mean, I do some small development, but nothing major. But that's what I've noticed when I'm talking to my developers that they kind of are looking for in others. They don't have to like the same movies. They don't have to like the same books. They don't have to like the same food, but they have to have some commonality in terms of how they philosophically think about development and the tools that they like to use. Like I had one developer who liked using command line, another developer who liked using GUIs, and they didn't get along at all. Like they just were totally, looking at the world from a totally different standpoint. And so those are the types of things I found that you kind of have to align a little bit.
How does hiring the wrong person end up, I guess, working, you know? Like, how do you deal with someone that, takes away from the team, and how fast are you able to kind of realize that they're kind of pulling people down?
Yeah, I think, it's a lot of times it's not even pulling people down intentionally. It's just that they're off doing it their way, and their way is just different from the way the rest of the team is doing it. And so you kind of realize, I think, pretty quickly if it's not going to work, or at least with a small team like I have, you realize it pretty quickly, right? If you're in a large organization with thousands of developers, it's probably a different story. And so at that point, you just kind of have to pull the plug. And there are two things. If they're a really good developer, you might be able to put them on something that is somewhat unrelated, like you could have them working on an API or working on one element of your application that isn't necessarily as tied into the main core of the application. Like maybe they're developing a phone app or something like that, which is not totally plugged in. You need to use some of the APIs, but you're not mixing code. And so you could potentially do something like that. I've done things like that before. Or if they're not interested in that and they really kind of have to be part of the core team, then you kind of have to figure out that, hey, maybe this isn't working. And that person probably realizes it also.
Maybe a little self-selection out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens, and what it does is it slows everything down because when you have a small team, every person who's contributing is important, and so you now have someone that you spent probably a month or 2 finding, you spent months probably bringing them on board, and then you've gotta basically take all of that and set it aside. So,
Start again.
yeah, so it's lost time and productivity.
Yep, yep. Well, I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk some more about what you're doing right now with Chainletter, which basically, if I've got this right, it's fundamentally about proving that something existed at a certain point in time that is true, right? That is made by humans, is not been altered by some sort of AI bot. So I was like, A, if you want to clarify exactly and say that correctly, right? We can edit that post. And also, what originally pulled you in that direction? Like, what was the thing that,
Yeah.
yeah, go for it.
Sure. So you've got it mostly right. I think, going back to sort of the core of what chain letter is,
Yeah.
it's really the fact, unfortunately, like humans have a lot of base characteristics, right? We love, we play, make money, but, raise kids. We do a lot of different things that are sort of fundamental to who we are as humans. We eat. But one of the things we also do, the dark side of what we do, is we lie. And so that's
Yeah.
that's sort of the fundamental piece of what chain letter is trying to get at. And if you look at how that manifests across the business world, there's some statistic that there's $4 trillion of fraud that happens every year. If you look at LinkedIn, they say that 40% of people have put purposely incorrect information on their LinkedIn profiles. Resumes are the same way. Legal documents, the same thing happens. You always hear about stories, people trying to manipulate or tamper or gain advantage in a
Yeah.
way that's not truthful. And so I've always been interested in the blockchain, since sort of 2009. I've been following it and I've wanted to get involved. And I bumped into my co-founders on actually one of my other websites on Booksie, which is an online publishing site. So they were members of Booksie, and I had posted something which said, "How do you think blockchain could potentially change the publishing industry?" And we got into a conversation. And so that led us to start talking, and we eventually decided to work together. And so one of the things that my co-founder had been working on is a process for being able to take a file, and it could be an image, it could be a document, a Word document, it could be a PDF, basically any type of file, and stamp it onto the blockchain. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm simplifying it down. And when you do that, basically anytime that image has been altered, it won't match what you have on the blockchain. All right. And the blockchain is a public record. And so anybody can go and check to see if that document is indeed what was originally created. Right. And so if you have a photo and that photo has been manipulated, it will no longer match the original photo. If you have a transcript that's been issued or a diploma that's been issued by a university, if it's been manipulated, it will no longer match what was originally created. You could go on and on and on. A legal document, same thing. And so what we have basically is a very simple, efficient process that doesn't have all of the baggage that normally comes with like a blockchain Web3 technology. There's no digital wallet that's associated with it. There's no tokens that are associated with it. It's very much kind of a combination of Web 2 and Web 3. So a very simple way to prove that something is in its authentic form. It hasn't been altered. It hasn't been tampered with. And you actually don't even know the identity. You don't need to know the identity of the person that created it or the person that holds it.
Yeah.
So it turns out there are a lot of really powerful applications for that. So as I mentioned, transcripts, universities could issue these and they would live forever, and you'd be able to quickly check someone's credential to see if it's valid or not. Driver's license, passports, legal documents, the list sort of goes on and on and on. And so that's what we're really interested in doing, is taking this technology and using it to create truth, and to do it in a way that AI can't come and manipulate it, and hopefully prevent people from being able to take advantage of that human characteristic of sometimes not wanting to tell the truth.
Yeah. Or oftentimes, depending on who we're talking about.
Oftentimes.
Yeah.
I try not to let that cynical side of me come out
Yeah,
too
yeah, yeah.
much. So
Fair enough. As AI generated content, it's becoming more and more realistic and convincing, and it seems to be happening, faster than anyone could ever imagine. So, do you think that kind of changes how organizations are able to establish truth? Is that just going to fundamentally change, or has it already?
I think some types of organizations will certainly be impacted more than others, like news organizations. I think they're definitely going to have a hard time of it.
Yep.
How do you know that that image that someone sent to you is actually a real image? I think politics is another area that could really be affected by it. I think any organization that deals in truth is going to potentially be challenged by it. Now, of course, everything deals in truth, right? I mean, at any level, at any organization, you could have people making up things. And
Yep.
so, do you think, to your question, at some level, every organization in the future is going to have to grapple with this? Is this report accurate? Is
Yep.
this financial statement accurate?
Definitely.
Has it been modified by AI? Has AI tampered with it? And these are all questions that we've had to deal with for, hundreds of years. It's just that AI makes the process easier,
Yeah.
right?
I would
You can
imagine
always
there's,
take a
yeah,
you
situations
can
where the
always take
people
a
don't
picture
know.
and put it into Photoshop and manipulate it. That's
Yeah.
something that, it could have been done 10, 15, 20 years ago, but now you don't need Photoshop. You or I or anyone who doesn't know Photoshop can take an image, throw it into AI. I've done it before. I was on a train going to Europe and I said, go ahead and show me on a private jet. Next thing I know, I was on a private jet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
so those are the types of things that I think are going to become, I mean, not that, but that's just an example of how people can manipulate anything really.
Which you can't stop, right? People are gonna do it. They're gonna use these tools in whatever way they see fit. But you can prove that at some point, that the thing was real, it was human created. And how so I know you do that using the blockchain. So why is that distinction so important right now, especially with where we're at?
Well, I think because the blockchain is a public record
Yeah.
that's being maintained by not just one institution or company, but by, a vast number of people.
Yeah.
And so it's like a public utility that people can tap into. I think because of that, it's less expensive to utilize in a lot of ways. And then there's also the sort of permanence of it. It's durable.
Yeah.
So, we like to talk about diplomas. If the company that issues diplomas, because there are other companies that issue digital diplomas, but they're not blockchain based. If
Gotcha.
they go out of business, your diploma is gone.
Yeah.
So your digital diploma is gone. It's residing in a proprietary database. And so we want to take it out of those proprietary databases and make them accessible and durable.
Gotcha.
How do you verify origin with the anonymity of the blockchain?
Yeah. So the way that we do it is, for the most part, we have trusted parties that are the ones that are verifying the file. So, for instance, diplomas, it would be universities. Universities are the issuers. And so you have to trust that the university is, a valid issuer. If you were talking about passports, it would be the United States government. And so we're not really working so that an individual can go ahead and post, because what authority does an individual necessarily have? I mean, I suppose there are some people that have enough authority, but in general, it's through trusted organizations and institutions. And so therefore you can trust that the source is a valid source. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. But again, and then kind of that focuses then on the institutions and kind of larger businesses, but less effective towards like artists or creators to kind of
Well, I mean,
verify.
I think artists and creators could do it also. I mean, they would be their own trusted source, really. And, you'd have to believe that that artist, let's say Banksy wanted to go ahead and stamp their stuff. They wanted to put it on the blockchain. Then, that this was officially done by them. So they'd have their own official certificate that would verify that this is indeed from this particular artist. I was just going to say that we have tools that allow individuals to, stamp their story or their artwork or whatever. Stamping is the term we use for putting it on the blockchain. And that might be something too. We're not pursuing that as much. We're coming out with an app also that you can put on your phone, so you could take a picture and then you could quickly put that picture onto the blockchain.
Gotcha.
I don't know. Like, I think we'll see how that goes. It's kind of interesting, but is that as compelling? I don't really know.
Yeah. Still some more testing and verification to be done there.
This is where the agile team comes in,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
we're kind of testing out a bunch of different ways of approaching this.
interesting. And do you think that we're gonna eventually, or maybe we're already there, we're getting there, certainly, I would think, to where unverified content is just inherently kind of not trustable and everyone's suspect?
I think at some point, if people continue to use AI, that will happen. And you can actually go on to LinkedIn now, and you'll see that there are some videos and images that are actually watermarked by this organization called Content Authority. And so what they're doing is they're trying to verify the provenance of these assets, of these images and videos. And some of them you'll see they're on there and they actually say developed by ChatGPT.
Yep.
And to be clear, we're not anti AI. We're not saying that people shouldn't use things that are AI generated,
Yeah.
but
Right.
you know, if they're doing it, they should disclose that they're AI generated, and they should also know that someone else isn't taking their AI generated thing and manipulating it even more. And so just understanding what the chain is, I think, will be somewhat important in the future for
Yeah.
some things, not for everything, but for some important documents and files, I think that's going to become essential.
To that end, do you think AI makes trust more fragile, more enforceable, or kind of somewhere in between on that spectrum?
I think AI has the potential to make it more fragile just because, like I said, it makes it easier for anyone to take things and manipulate them. And so it's that ease. Once again, I use AI. Some of my code uses AI. So I'm not in any way saying that people shouldn't use it, but I do feel that it has the potential to erode trust a little bit. And so, if AI is like a superpower that allows people to do that, then you need kind of a countervailing force, right? You need the yin and the yang. And that's where I think, I don't know if this blockchain type of solution is 100% the solution, but I think in a lot of cases, it can provide a counterweight to what AI is doing. So, or the potential for AI to erode trust. So that's kind of how we're looking at it. It's kind of a base layer of trust, and then you can build AI on top of it, but you can always go back to that base layer and understand kind of where this file or this image kind of came from and started with.
And it feels like you're almost saying that like AI is almost changing the nature of evidence.
It is, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that in the future we're going to hear, and even when you see things on the news, people are wondering, is it a real image? Has it been doctored? Has it been manipulated? So I think that's what we're going to have to deal with as a society.
Yeah, and I mean, right now we don't really have like a single or many sources of truth that tell us any of that stuff. Do you think that ultimately there'll be a number of different chain letter style companies that do this, or do
I
you
would
think
think
that it
so.
will?
Yeah. Yeah. I think probably for different verticals, different uses, for sure. It's not just, I mean, we're talking about, law, we're talking about credentials, we're talking about identity. There are companies out there that are looking into military applications. How do you know the military is receiving the right source of truth? How do you know its communications haven't been altered and intercepted? So there are companies that are looking into that. I think there's a wide gamut of different ways that people are going to try to protect and like, I think that's a term that I like, create different sources of truth.
I know every time I see an image or a video now, I'm kind of like, I'm gonna look a little closer, a little harder. Like, is this, what's actually happening here? Versus when it's it's
It
like
was
a
easier
fish
back
with a
in the day
cat
when
head. I
people just
know.
had multiple
Yeah,
fingers.
Well, right. Some of it's pretty obvious,
exactly. A lot of it,
but
they're
it's
not
that
trying
it's
to
that
lie.
non-obvious.
Yeah, exactly. It's the ones that are lying, right? Stopping liars. Well, okay, so let's go all the way back. If you were going to start from scratch, right? New company and a new team, what would you design first? Would you design your product? Would you design your team? Would you kind of lay out rules of engagement? Would it be something else? Like, what would you start with if you had to just start fresh?
Yeah. So I think that the team is everything. Like, I think the team is like the most important piece of it because if you have a good team, you can find the right product.
Yeah.
You can find the right, product market fit. And so I'm a big believer in having the right team. So I would start there but a team that's aligned and has, somewhat of an idea about what they want to try to do. and go from there, go from the team to the product and then let the rest sort of follow. That's kind of how I think about it.
Nice. So what, and this can be regarding Sol himself, Chainletter, Booksy, kind of what's next, what's got you excited, what's on the horizon that you want people to know about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about Chainletter. We're continuing to kind of develop the platform. We're rolling out sort of our first credential application soon. So starting to talk to different colleges and universities about that. We're also rolling out our legal application. So starting to talk to law firms about that so that, if you want to get your will in a digital format, like, I don't know if you know this, but in most states, the courts won't actually accept a will in a digital format. You have to have the actual original paper copy of your will or of the person's will who you're, settling. And so that's really kind of a tedious process. If you lose that original paper copy, it's a really difficult process.
Yeah.
And so those laws are slowly starting to change. There are a bunch of different states that are changing them, and we want to be part of the solution as digital wills become enforceable. So there's that. Another area that we're really kind of interested in has to do with collectibles and luxury goods. And so think about that. That's another area where there's all kinds of lying going on,
Yeah.
right? Is that Prada purse really a Prada purse? Is it, a knockoff? Was it bought when they said it was bought? So the resale market for these types of products and the initial sale market is huge. And so that's another area where Chainletter can play a role to help people serve as a source of truth. So those are some of the areas that we're looking into. It's an exciting time. We're also thinking about, as I said, rolling out sort of an AI is not assistant, but to help counteract some of the effects of AI so that people can use that if they want to, whether you're an artist or, an assessor or whatever role you might have. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it and look forward to continuing to move things forward.
Nice. And where should people go to find out more, to kind of follow the journey? What's the best place to find y'all at?
They can go to chainletterlabs.com or they can find us on LinkedIn. So we're kind of active in both places.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here today, Sol. It's been a pleasure. Franz, I don't know if you have any other closing questions, but
I do not have more closing questions, but I am happy that you took the time to talk to us because this was fascinating, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Kyle and Franz, for having me. It was a lot of fun. So enjoyed it.
yeah, likewise.